Great. So once again, we're just beginning our affordable housing town hall this evening. My name is Andrew Nowick. I'm happy to have so many people here this evening. For me, affordable housing, we're going to be talking a lot about it in the weeks and months and years to come. But for me, it's not just about hitting a number of units. It's not just about satisfying a legal obligation. It's not about avoiding the consequences of a failed settlement agreement. It's really about establishing once and for all a culture that seeks to broaden our community by recognizing and valuing diversity. It's about equity. It's about people. So bearing that in mind, I am going to just say, what else do I want to say? Just that we're recording. This recording will be posted to the city website. Also, Emily's slideshow, the deck, will also be posted to the city website. And we should have time for some questions and answers this evening. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily. But first, again, I'm going to thank Emily and Council President Taylor. The last 5 or 6 weeks, we've been working pretty hard to look at affordable housing here in the city, and I think that we're making some. I expect that we're going to make some good progress this year. So, Emily, I'm going to turn it over to you now. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mayor. Just some quick little housekeeping. Since we're in a meeting format here, there will be some time for question and answer at the end of the presentation. So if you can just remain mute, keep yourself on mute during the presentation, and then at the end, use that raise hand feature, and we can call on you to try to keep this as somewhat orderly as we move forward with the presentation. Okay. So tonight we're at the first affordable housing town hall for the city of Lambertville. Quickly, a little bit about myself. I'm a senior associate at Clark Caton Hints. I've been a licensed professional planner since 2009. I first moved to Lambertville in 2005. I bought my house in town in 2012. Since moving to town in 2005, I've served on multiple city commissions, the Shade Tree Commission, which I chaired for 6 or 7 years of my time on that commission, the Environmental Commission, as well as being the Environmental Commission representative on the planning board before being appointed as the city planner in 2013. I have either worked or I'm currently working in 12 different municipalities in the state just on affordable housing matters. And I've also assisted various court appointed special masters that are in my office on affordable housing matters in 18 municipalities in over 8 counties in the state. So a little of what we're going to cover today is, why do we have to provide affordable housing? What is affordable housing? Some of the terminology, I mean, let's be real, there's a lot of terminology when it comes to affordable housing. So I'm including some of the key terminology in the slide deck, a brief history of affordable housing in New Jersey, the what's known as the Mount Laurel 4 decision, which is the 2015 court case that kind of changed how we handle affordable housing in New Jersey, Lambertville's affordable housing obligation, some discussion on what a vacant land analysis is, and kind of what Lambertville has done since that 2015 Mount Laurel 4 decision in trying to meet its obligation, some key facts as to where we stand right now in meeting our obligation, and then next steps. So first and foremost, why are we providing affordable housing? So property ownership, whether you're a homeowner or landowner, is an investment. It gives you credit. It increases in investment value depend on demand being greater than the supply, which drives up prices. That includes rents as well as home prices. Some people cannot afford to participate in the property investment market, but they still need a place to live. In order to preserve investment opportunities for those who want them and still house everybody, we need housing that's outside of that investment sorry. And in New Jersey, the courts have ruled that every municipality has an obligation to provide its fair share of affordable housing. So what exactly is affordable housing? So the state Council on Affordable Housing Regulations, which I'll kind of get into what Council on Affordable Housing is in a little bit, is housing where the sales or rent prices are within the means of a low or moderate income household. So what does that mean? A low income household is means 50% or less, or sorry, low income means 50% or less of the median gross household income for households in the same size within the housing region that that household is located in. So I know that's a lot to process there. So the housing region, or we'll start with the housing region. So Hunterdon County is in the housing region with Somerset and Middlesex County. We actually have the highest income levels out of all 6 of the regions in the state of New Jersey. So I have included a table here of the 2021 prices for what is considered affordable housing. And that's split up between, the top row shows the medium income, and then below that is what's considered the moderate income level, or 80% of the median. The next row down is low income, or 50% of the median. And then the bottom row is very low income, which is 30% of the median. So, as you can see, an individual making just under $69,000 a year could qualify for affordable housing. So some of the terminology I'm going to be discussing and talking about throughout the slide deck is accessory apartments. So these are a second dwelling on the same property that can either be in the main principal building or in an accessory building that, such as a detached garage on the same property. And this would be affordable to a household that's in one of those very low or moderate income levels. An area in need of redevelopment. This is a legal designation based on the New Jersey local redevelopment and housing law. It's got to be approved by the governing body. And this is designating an area that has not been developed through private investment and is eligible based on specific considerations. It could be that it's just been vacant for too long. There's specific site conditions. The property is over 5 acres inside and has been destroyed by fire, natural disasters, or it's just been abandoned and has gone to such disrepair that it's just not tenable again. An area in need of redevelopment can be designated either as a condemnation redevelopment area or a non-condemnation redevelopment area. So that means the municipality can, if it wanted to, use eminent domain to basically acquire that property at fair market value. Similarly, you can designate a property as an area in need of rehabilitation. That's not as an extensive or difficult analysis to do. It's basically a site would qualify as an area in need of rehabilitation so long as the structure and surrounding neighborhood structures are 50 years or older, as well as the water and sewer lines are 50 years or older or more. Some other key terminology is builder's remedy. This is something that a court can award to a developer who proves that a municipality is not providing its fair share of affordable housing. So this basically, if a developer is awarded a builder's remedy, they basically can propose a project regardless of what the underlying zoning is. And most often it results in a much denser development. It might result in townhouses or multifamily apartment buildings, whereas maybe only single family detached dwellings are permitted in that zone. So it's a situation where the municipality really does not have much control over what the end project will look like if a developer is awarded a builder remedy. And any builder remedy that is awarded is required to have a 20%, 15 or 20% affordable housing set aside. Deed restriction, so any affordable housing unit that the city or municipality can take credit for, it must be deed restricted. The length of that deed restriction depends on the type of compliance mechanism. More generally than not, there's a 30-year deed restriction required, but if it's a accessory apartment, for example, only a 10-year deed restriction would be required. A development fee is a fee that is charged to any basically new construction. So the city has a development fee ordinance, and this is required by both the Fair Housing Act and the I believe the Uniform Housing Controls. But a residential new construction project, if the development is not providing an affordable housing unit, then each unit constructed is assessed a 1.5% of the equalized assessed value of that dwelling. They have to pay into an affordable housing fee. Same thing for non-residential development. Any non-residential new construction has a 2.5% of the equalized value development fee that they have to pay. All of that money goes into an interest-bearing escrow account called the Housing Trust Fund, and that money can only be used to support development and construction and affordability assistance of affordable housing units. Fair Share Housing Center, this is the public interest organization that advocates for housing for low and moderate income households in the state. They have been approved by the courts as being an interested party in every single municipality's settlement agreement negotiations and basically affordable housing approvals. Let's see. So the Fair Share is primarily who the city has been dealing with since 2015. The housing element and Fair Share plan, this is the master plan document that identifies how the housing, the municipality or city will meet its affordable housing obligation. It's required to include current demographic information, as well as identifying the specific mechanisms the municipality will use. Inclusionary zoning and inclusionary overlay zoning. So inclusionary zoning, this is zoning where as Mayor Fall used to talk about these mixed income developments. So inclusionary zoning is a zone that permits kind of a split of market rate units as well as a percentage of affordable housing units. So typically if it's a for sale project, there'll be a 20% set aside. So say you have 100 units in the development, 20 of those would have to be affordable units. If it's a rental project, then you only have a 15% set aside. So only 15 of those units would have to be affordable units. Similarly, as the city has actually adopted some of these inclusionary overlay zones. So the difference between straight inclusionary zoning and then an inclusionary overlay zone is that inclusionary zoning becomes the new zoning district for that site and the new zoning regulations. Whereas the overlay zone, it's kind of an additional permitted option for that site. So the base zoning is still the underlying zoning, but it just provides another potential option for that site. It doesn't require any property owner that's within that overlay zone to actually utilize that zoning. The mandatory set aside ordinance, I think what we've, this is a ordinance that for towns that have a adjustment, such as Lambertville with the vacant land adjustment, which I'll talk about a little more later on. This is something that Fair Share and the courts have required municipalities to adopt in order to provide a means for a realistic opportunity to provide affordable units. So basically, the mandatory set aside ordinance, typically it's for any projects that require a use variance, density variance, or redevelopment plan work or rezoning, they're required to then have a 15 or 20% set aside for affordable housing units. As I'll also discuss a little later, the city just amended its mandatory set aside ordinance in December to actually expand that. So parts of the downtown have an existing density that's greater than 6 units per acre. So I guess I should back up a little bit. The mandatory set aside ordinance kicks in when a developer produces 5 units or more at a minimum density of 6 units per acre or more. So what the city has done, because kind of the flat portion of the city is generally has a density of 6 units per acre or more, just based on the current zoning. They've expanded their mandatory set aside ordinance such that any just site plan application that would result in the 5 units or more that are already at that presumptive minimum density of the 6 units per acre or more will require that same mandatory set aside ordinance. And finally, the last slide of terminology is realistic development potential. This relates to that vacant land analysis. And this is, basically the city's obligation or municipal obligations are broken up into three parts. It's a present need, which is the rehabilitation obligation, the prior round obligation, which was determined in the first and second rounds of the affordable housing rules, and then the third round. So what the city did is they actually, they didn't have a prior round obligation. They only had a new third round obligation in this round of affordable housing. So because the city is almost completely built out, they were able to do a vacant land analysis, which again, I'll get into in a little more detail, but when you do a vacant land analysis, you then identify what the realistic development potential is based on the available land that there still is to build on. And then conversely, kind of at the bottom of the slide, I probably should have put these two together, is whatever your third round obligation then gets split between that realistic development potential and then the unmet need. So whatever your realistic development potential isn't, the rest of that obligation is then considered unmet need. And I'll explain that a little more when I talk about the vacant land analysis. And then lastly, there's the regional contribution agreements, or RCAs. This was a mechanism that was permitted in the first and second rounds. It's no longer permitted, but this allowed municipalities to transfer up to 50% of their obligation to other towns. So Lambertville is actually a receiving town. So 5 other towns gave Lambertville money to create units on their behalf. So, if I refer to RCAs later on in the slide deck, that's what I'm talking about, but they're no longer a valid mechanism. And then lastly, rental bonuses. So municipalities can claim double credit for affordable rental units, for rental units, but not for sale units. And up to 25% of an obligation can be met by these rental bonuses. Okay, so, why does New Jersey have to provide affordable housing when no other state really has these mandates to provide affordable housing? So this is going back to 1975 with the first Supreme Court, New Jersey Supreme Court decision known as Mount Laurel 1. And in that decision, the courts found that it's a constitutional obligation to provide opportunities for affordable housing within developing municipalities. So it wasn't even statewide then. In 1983 was the second Supreme Court decision, and that was called Mount Laurel 2. And at that point, the Supreme Court extended that obligation to every municipality in the state. They also then gave developers the opportunity, under appropriate circumstances, to secure those builder remedy lawsuits that I discussed earlier. Also, as a result of Mount Laurel 2, the Fair Housing Act was created and passed which establishes guidelines for providing affordable housing. The Fair Housing Act also then created the Council on Affordable Housing, which is a state agency who wrote the rules for producing affordable housing and determined the municipal obligations and oversaw compliance of the program. So the first and second rounds, it was from 1983 to 1999. COA then failed to adopt rules that would be ready for what should have been the third round starting in 1999. They adopted their next round of rules in 2004, but they changed the methodology to determine how affordable housing was identified in each municipality and implemented what's known as the growth share approach that linked the production of affordable housing to future residential and non-residential development. So they initially said for every 8 market rate units, 1 affordable housing unit had to be created, or for every 25 jobs created through non-residential development, 1 affordable housing unit had to be created. So in January of 2007, the New Jersey Appellate Division invalidated a lot of the key elements of this growth share methodology and required the Council on Affordable Housing to propose and adopt amendments to the rules. COA issued amended rules in 2008, but still use that growth share approach. And they just revised the ratios to result in more affordable housing units to be created faster. Also in 2008, there was amendments to the Fair Housing Act, as well as the New Jersey Economic Stimulus Act, known as the Roberts Bill. So in these, this established that mandatory statewide 2.5% non-residential development fee, which during the New Jersey Economic Stimulus Act was put on a moratorium until 2013. So no town could actually collect that non-residential development fee until 2013 when the moratorium ended. These amendments also eliminated those regional contribution agreements that I discussed, and then added a requirement that 13% of all affordable housing units must be restricted for that very low income level, which is those individuals or households earning 30% or less of the median income. In 2010, the appellate court decision again invalidated COA's rules that they adopted in 2008, using that growth share methodology. This decision also required municipalities to start showing site control, site suitability, availability of sewer service, and proposed sources of funding for projects. Specifically for municipally sponsored or 100% projects, but those kind of the site control, suitability, and everything were really needed to be detailed for kind of any proposed affordable housing project. So current day, well, I guess kind of current situation of affordable housing. In 2015, there was a huge New Jersey Supreme Court decision known as Mount Laurel 4. In this decision, the court transferred the responsibility for reviewing and approving affordable housing plans from the Council of Affordable Housing to designated Mount Laurel trial judges. So it basically removed that the power and compliance review from the state body to the court system. So the courts then established a process whereby municipalities could petition for what's called a declaratory judgment or a DJ action, seeking approval of their proposed means of addressing their affordable housing. So before you used to petition the state, now you have to work through the court system. Through filing these motions, the municipalities could file motions for temporary immunity from those builder remedy lawsuits while they work through this declaratory judgment process. But because the third round was technically supposed to start in 1999, we're now at 2015. There's, a 16-year gap where no affordable housing was being provided. The courts found that there's now this gap period defined as that period between 1999 and 2015, where municipalities were still generating an obligation to provide the affordable housing, so they added that into this third round obligation. So the obligations, generally each round of affordable housing is only supposed to be 10 years. In this instance, it's been way longer since we haven't had effective rules since 1999. So for this third round, what is Lambertville's obligation? We have a present need or rehabilitation obligation of 1 unit. The city's actually rehabilitated 3 units since 2015, so we've satisfied that. As I said earlier, there was a prior round obligation, but the city has never had a new construction obligation before, so we don't have to worry about that one. And then there's this third round obligation. So this is that gap period I talked about from 1999 to 2015, plus what's prospective need, which is that 2015 to 2025 period, that 10-year period that's supposed to be the current third round. So with that, the city, they, through their first settlement agreement, settled to a third round obligation of 137 units. And that was calculated based on a report prepared by David Kinsey, who was Fair Share Housing Center's consultant to determine methodology, with a 30% reduction negotiated by the city as part of that settlement agreement. So with that 137 unit obligation, the city then completed a vacant land analysis, because in reality, there's really not much land for the city to actually build on to produce 137 affordable housing units, which will in reality be way more than 137 units, because it's highly unlikely that these would all be within 100% affordable housing development. So these would result in more of those inclusionary developments, which would require more units. And there's really just not the land to do that. So what I had done for the city is I prepared a vacant land analysis. And this is a process by which the municipality additions to have their obligations reduced because there's just not the land to develop the units on. So what the analysis requires is that you identify every vacant parcel within the city. You then have to look at if there's, subtract out any environmental constraints, if they're, preserved open space, historic designated sites. There's certain criteria of what you can subtract out. And then you need to multiply each property, the gross acreage of, the net acreage of the properties with all those constraints subtracted out by a minimum presumptive density of that 6 units per acre. And based on the number of units that would result at 6 units per acre, you then multiply that by a 20% affordable housing set aside. So if that site would then result in 1 unit or more of affordable housing units, that then gets added into your realistic development potential. So let me give you an example. So say the obligation is 200 units. The vacant land analysis identifies 35 vacant parcels that total 30 developable acres. So you would take those 30 acres times that minimum presumptive density of the 6 dwelling units per acre times that 20% affordable housing set aside. That results in 36 units. So the realistic development potential for the city, or for this, made up city, would be 36 units. So the municipality has to provide the 36 units. Now the unmet need would be that main obligation, the total obligation, that 200 units minus the 36 units. So the unmet need then is 164 units. The municipality then has to provide realistic opportunities to create as many of these units as possible. And that's where the overlay zones come in, the mandatory set aside ordinance, things like that. Okay, so that's a lot of background history to get to where we are today. So, and starting with the declaratory judgment.
You knew because you were trying to get me in trouble.
So the city did submit their declaratory judgment on July 8th of 2015. Not immediately after that, but in October of 2015, the city designated the Lambertville High School site as a non-condemnation redevelopment area. September of 2016 is when I presented the vacant land analysis to the court-appointed special master, which was ultimately approved as part of our initial settlement agreement with Fair Share Housing Center. And that's what reduced the city's 137 unit obligation down to what we say is a calculated RDP of 88 units and an unmet need of 49 units, not 149, just 49 units. And then let's see, between June 2017 and April 2018, the city was in settlement discussions with the owner of the Lambertville High School site to see if they could just identify reasonable zoning to zone the site for an inclusionary project for affordable housing. We had 4 mediation sessions with the court-appointed special master, and it just, we weren't really making progress. So at a case management conference in April of 2018, the city determined that they'd rather just move forward with a condemnation redevelopment plan instead for the high school site, so we could get site control and then come up with a plan to develop the site in the best means that we thought would be suitable for the city while still providing those affordable units. So, once we got past that, the city was able to execute its first settlement agreement with Fair Share Housing Center in May of 2018. As I discussed previously, our third round obligation was 137 units. That was broken up into 88 RDP of 88, and then the unmet need of 49. The following month, the city redid their preliminary investigation for the high school site to identify it as a condemnation redevelopment area, and the governing body then designated the high school site as a condemnation area in June of 2018. That following August, the owner of the Lambertville High School site, Academy Hill, filed its first of many lawsuits pertaining to that condemnation redevelopment designation against the city. It should be noted that Academy Hill first started filing lawsuits against the city back in 1998. So there's a very long-standing history of lawsuits between the city and the high school site. In September of 2018, the city attended a fairness hearing at the courts on the settlement agreement. And then in October of that same year, the court approved the city's settlement agreement with Fair Share Housing Center. So once the court approved that settlement agreement, then you move into compliance, compliance kind of resolution, where you have to then produce the documents and everything that you say you're going to do in the settlement agreement. So the first thing that the city did is in November of 2018, they introduced the ordinance that created the affordable housing ordinance, including that mandatory set-aside ordinance. They introduced the ordinance for adopting the condemnation redevelopment plan for the high school site, as well as introducing an overlay zoning ordinance for the Berg Farmstead, the Corboy property, the Trenton Cracker Factory, which is where the River Horse Brewery used to be, as well as the Clausen site. Also in November of 2018, the planning board adopted the housing element fair share plan that complied with that settlement agreement. So then in November 28th, 2018, the city had their public hearings on the various ordinances. They adopted the affordable housing ordinance. They adopted the high school condemnation redevelopment plan. However, they rescinded the overlay ordinance because of the significant amount of public opposition about putting one of those overlay ordinances on the Clausen site. I don't know if any of you were at those meetings, but it was definitely standing room only meetings with everybody upset about the overlay on the Clausen site. So then, after much discussions, the city decided to move forward with the overlay zone ordinance for the other properties except the Clausen site. So they introduced and adopted the overlay zones for the Bird Farmstead, the Corboy site, and the Trenton Cracker Factory in March and April of 2019. But because we removed the Clausen site, the city then had to come up with alternatives to replace those units that the city would have received from the Clausen site. So they started talking to other property owners for other potential overlay zones, rehabilitation designations, or redevelopment designations. They talked to the people from the YMAC site, the Finkel's Warehouse site, CVS, as well as the auto parts. The city actually went so far to designate the YMAC site as a rehabilitation area, hoping that they would be able to work with the contract purchaser to potentially develop a small multifamily apartment building there. They prepared overlay zoning ordinance for the Finkel's Warehouse site as well as the auto parts site. The day before the first reading, Finkel's, there was already a lot of public opposition out in the world, so to the affordable housing overlays. So Finkel's requested to be removed from that overlay because they just couldn't stomach. They had just actually gone through a tough application at the planning board where they were the property owner, there was a contract purchaser, and they were already having issues based on that. They couldn't handle any negative connotations from also being part of an overlay zone. So the city on August 22nd moved forward with the first reading of the overlay zone for the auto parts site only. However, there was a lot of public opposition to that one as well. So in September of 2019, the governing body then rescinded the auto parts site overlay. Also in September of 2019, the developer of the YMAC site, because of the public opposition that occurred for the auto parts site, decided he no longer wanted to pursue the rehabilitation designation and which would have resulted in a redevelopment plan for multifamily housing, and would rather just produce something based on the underlying zoning. October of 2019, after a couple months of discussions with the CVS site owners, they were no longer interested in moving forward with discussions as well. So, at that point, the city felt like they were kind of out of options. The clock was ticking. Fair Share was getting somewhat impatient. So we needed to come up with something so we could amend that settlement agreement. So the city presented the idea, and this is where the kind of the police site project came about, is that at the same time the city was looking at a whole bunch of things going on. There was a lot of deferred maintenance on all of the municipal buildings. The city had an affordable housing obligation, as well as a surplus deficit that they needed to figure out how to, get more money to fund. And so part of the negotiation with Fair Share for the amended settlement agreement was then replacing that Clausen site overlay with both the police station site redevelopment as well as a 5-unit accessory apartment program. Both of these were to address the city's unmet need and not the realistic development potential. But while we had the settlement agreement open, we also negotiated removing that condemnation aspect from the high school site. So the redevelopment plan is still in place for the 139 units, which would result in 28 affordable housing units, but no longer was a condemnation plan. So here's a summary kind of what the city in that amended settlement agreement, what the compliance mechanisms are to meet the 88 unit realistic development potential. So the city has the existing Little Haven group home. That's a supportive special needs home, credits given by the bedroom.
Looks like Emily just froze up, so let's hang tight for just a minute. Maybe she will unfreeze. All right, looks like Emily's probably signed off and she'll probably sign back on here in a minute. Yep, here she comes.
Sorry about that. Just wait, it says I'm muted still. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just got inadvertently booted, so thankfully I was able to get back quickly. Am I still sharing my screen or do I need to reshare?
Reshare, please.
Okay. Oh, let me get to where I was. Oh, sorry, going the wrong way. Okay, sorry about that. So as I was saying, because of those kind of formulas we have to meet, we were only able to use 11 of the 18 bedrooms for the Little Haven group home to meet our RDP. The city has 4 Habitat for Humanity family for sale units that they can use towards their obligation. There's actually a total of 8 Habitat homes in the city. However, as 4 of those were created using those RCA money that came in from the other municipalities, so we can't take credit for them, but the city assisted in the creation of 4. So we can take credit for 4 of the 8 that are in the city. Heritage Village is a 37, or it's an 87 unit age restricted multifamily apartment building. 37 of those units, the city can get credit for. The remaining 50 were funded through those RCAs as well. So again, because of those formulas and calculations, we can use 22 of those 37 units towards meeting our RDP. And then there's the Munis accessory apartment. This is an existing accessory apartment that we can also use towards our RDP. So that leaves us of a balance where we have 38 units that we have existing in the city that we can use towards meeting our RDP. So we need to come up with 50 additional units and credits. So you'll see the last item down on the table is this inclusionary zoning, which is that Lambertville High School redevelopment site. So those would be family rentals. The redevelopment plan calls for a total of 139 units with a 20% set aside. That would result in 28 affordable units. So part of our initial settlement agreement, there was some timelines that we had to meet in order to move that redevelopment plan forward, where timelines to adopt the redevelopment plan, the condemnation redevelopment plan, there was timelines to initiate the condemnation of the property to get site control. So as part of the when we remove that condemnation aspect from the police or from the high school site as part of this new settlement agreement, the court shifted those kind of timeframes to the police site that the city would then control instead. And I'll talk about that a little more later. And then the other half of the amended settlement agreement is the unmet need. So this table outlines how the city intended to meet that 49 unit unmet need. So the city's already adopted that affordable housing development fee ordinance and a spending plan. We have the remaining 7 bedrooms at the Little Haven group home. There's a remaining 12 units at the Heritage Village age restricted rental building. There's the Lily Street apartment, which is the apartment that's in the same building as the library. And then there's the two inclusionary zones that we had adopted in 2019 for the Bird Farmstead and the Corboy lot, as well as the Trenton Cracker Factory. And then the city had adopted that mandatory set aside ordinance. So the new items that were added to the unmet need during this amended settlement agreement, as I previously discussed, was the police site redevelopment and that proposed accessory apartment program to replace the overlay that was initially on the Clausen site in our original settlement agreement. So once we had that amended settlement agreement, the city again was in compliance mode where they had to then create all the documents to satisfy that agreement. So the city adopted an amended redevelopment plan for the high school site, converting it from a condemnation plan to a non-condemnation plan. They adopted their amended affordable housing, housing element and fair share plan that was consistent with this amended settlement agreement. And all during this time, there was a lot of public questions and confusion and opposition. So Council President Taylor, as well as Councilwoman Urbish at the time, organized an affordable housing information session where Eric Dobson from Fair Share Housing Center and Elizabeth McManus, who is a planner at Kyle McManus, I think it's Associates, presented to the city kind of some history and background on affordable housing in New Jersey and the new process through the court system. The city then had its fairness and preliminary compliance hearing on May 12th, 2020, where the court ultimately approved that the settlement and granted a conditional judgment of repose, keeping the city immune from builder's remedy in June 23rd, 2020. So again, this is where the court found that amended settlement agreement was fair and provided opportunities for the creation of low and moderate households, as well as granting a conditional judgment. So the city didn't have a final judgment, so they weren't just, couldn't just like clean their hands and say they were done, let's just build the units and, only have to do annual monitoring until 2025. But it actually outlined some things that the city had to prepare and submit to the court to prove that they were still moving forward. So some of these included income, confirming income levels at some of the existing developments, as well as primarily for the police site, set those kind of timeframes we had to meet, which included adopting a redevelopment plan by the end of 2020, and then adopting a redevelopment agreement in 2021. So the city, basically marched forward to meet all of those conditions of that conditional judgment of repose, where they designated the police site as that redevelopment area in July of 2020. They hosted design vetting sessions for the police redevelopment plan in September of 2020, and then ultimately adopted the redevelopment plan in December. I think September 2020 was the design vetting, adopted the redevelopment plan in December of 2020, meeting that condition of the conditional judgment of repose. And then to keep moving forward, they issued an RFP for the development of the police site in February 2021. The city didn't receive any responses, so they reissued that in April of 2021. The city then designated Callian Companies as the redeveloper. In June of 2021, in the meantime, while they were working with Callian, they discussions with the council decided to amend the mandatory set aside ordinance, as I discussed earlier, to require any development kind of in the downtown flat portion of the city that already has a density over that presumptive minimum 6 unit per acre density have that mandatory set aside for affordable housing. And then, as everybody knows, December 16th of this past year, 2021, the city voted down the resolution approving the redevelopment agreement with Calian Companies and tabled the ordinance for the payment in lieu of taxes for the redevelopment. So essentially halting that process for 2021. And in the order for the city to move forward with this project, if they wanted to, they would have to designate a new redeveloper for the site and negotiate new agreements and kind of start that process all over again. So, what are the key facts out of all of this, and it's since 2015, when we first submitted our declaratory judgment action, the city's only created 2 affordable units. One habitat home and an accessory apartment that was just created in 2021. So the other key facts is our initial settlement agreement had to be amended to replace the Clawson overlay site that was removed. So we needed to come up with another mechanism or mechanisms how to create a realistic opportunity to create those affordable units. The removal of that condemnation aspect from the Academy Hill site was transferred to the which had court required timeframes for adopting and moving forward on that project, were transferred to the police site, even though that's an unmet needs site. And technically the unmet need you don't have to develop, but because the city had site control of that site and no longer would have site control over the Academy Hill site, the court transferred those timeframe requirements to the police site to kind of make the city move forward and have that site be developed. Since the city didn't move forward with adopting the redevelopment agreement with Calian, the city is currently out of compliance with that amended settlement agreement. So now the city has to amend its settlement agreement again. So what's next? Well, one of the first things we want to do is actually update the city's affordable housing website so it's a little more user-friendly. We realize right now there's a ton of information on there and it's not very easily digestible. We need to identify new affordable housing compliance mechanisms the city can use to meet its obligation. We'll need to negotiate a new amended settlement agreement with Fair Share Housing Center. And once and if the court approves the new amended settlement agreement, then the city would have to adopt a new amended housing element fair share plan, as well as any ordinances necessary to implement those new compliance mechanisms. So that's kind of all the background and a lot of information I know at once. I'm, happy to take questions, which I'm sure some of you will have while I still have the screen up, because I think I'll probably stop sharing screen for the Q&A session. Just wanted to invite everybody to join us again on March 3rd for the second town hall meeting, which is where we really get into more of what are the compliance mechanisms that are available to the city to utilize to meet its affordable obligation. And this is really where there'll be more opportunities for the public to kind of have smaller breakout groups, talk amongst themselves, and then present back to the city and present to us what compliance mechanisms that they think are viable, good mechanisms the city should move forward with. So thank you for listening to my very long presentation. Again, I'm sorry, I know it's a lot of information at once, and I am happy to take questions.
Thank you, Emily. Feel free to get a drink of water or something. It's a long presentation. Well done. For those of you who might have a question for Emily, please raise your hand and I will ask you to unmute yourself. I would just ask that you identify yourself by name and your address before you ask your question. We've got some time. So anybody have any questions for Emily or myself?
It looks like Carol, sorry,
Yeah,
for
Carol,
the
it would actually, I'll get to you, Carol, in just a second. It would actually be helpful if you go to the reactions button down on the lower part of your screen and then actually there's a raise hand function there, which will move you right to the top. Great. Okay, Carol, you should be ready to go.
Thank you for the presentation. I think that was really well done. I had 3 questions. The first is the Academy Hill, the old Trenton High School site still a possibility for use for affordable housing? The second question regards the old Trenton Cracker Factory site, whether that's still possible, because I believe that's also where an application is pending for a cannabis retail store. And if the planning board agrees that and the state signs off on that, I don't think that would be available anymore. And the third question regards Habitat for Humanity. Is there a way they might be interested in getting involved in providing more affordable housing sites? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. So the first question about Academy Hill, yes, they're very much still in our plan. It's still a viable site, for affordable housing. It's our most recent suit from the property owner was decided in just this past December, where the court found that the redevelopment plan still provides a realistic opportunity for the affordable housing. So it's really, at this point, the landowner, finding a developer or having a developer approach the city with maybe some minor amendments or a revised concept plan for the city to review and accept. And maybe the redevelopment plan gets amended, but up until now, there hasn't been any kind of discussions with the property owner and any potential developers of that site. In terms of the Trenton Cracker Factory, yes, I just finished my review memo for the cannabis retail application. That is for the former River Horse portion of the site. There's still a fairly significant portion of the site that's vacant where the Center Club gym used to be. So, there's still the potential that affordable housing overlay can be used for that portion of the site where they could still adaptively reuse it, convert it into apartments with a portion of them being set aside for affordable housing. So it doesn't preclude the overlay completely. It's just potentially a smaller portion of the site that would be used for that. And then in terms of habitat, I think it's definitely something the city could probably pursue to see if there's potential for partnership for additional habitat homes. The one thing that in terms of the city's obligation or the city's existing affordable housing units, we have a lot of age restricted units. Not only do we have Heritage Village, but there's also the Hibernia Apartments and the South Hunterdon Apartments. Both Hibernia Apartments and South Hunterdon Apartments were created prior to 1980. So the city can't actually take credit for them as part of meeting their affordable housing obligation, unfortunately, unless there's a major gut rehabilitation of both of those complexes. So we have them in the city. Unfortunately, we can't capitalize them in terms of affordable housing obligations, but we do have an abundance of age-restricted affordable units. We have the couple habitats. The only thing that the city really does not have are those family rentals, which are the I don't want to say the best housing type for affordable households, but it's fairly difficult for affordable households to obtain mortgages to actually buy units. So they're somewhat of the friendliest methods, I would say, to actually provide housing for affordable households. Plus we get the rental bonuses. So I wouldn't say that there's no opportunity for habitat, but we need to really focus on getting those rental units, and habitat in this area only does for sale units.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Judy, I'm going to ask you to unmute and then you should be good.
Hi, thank you, Emily, for that summary of everything that's happened. That's always very helpful. I have two questions. The first is whether, in view of the 2 years of COVID, in view of the damages from Ida, and in view of our change in administration, I'm wondering if there's any opportunity to revisit with the court the deadlines we are currently under. And my second question is whether you can say, with the number of units that have been built in this town in the past 3 years, why have none of them had any affordable units? So those are my questions.
Okay, so the first one, the deadlines with the court, I mean, at this point, we have already had one. Our trial judge, Judge Miller, is actually retiring on March 15th. So we've had one case management call or case management conference with him in the end of January, beginning of February, to discuss kind of status update. We have another one scheduled with him this Thursday. So we have kind of every 2 weeks at this point, calls scheduled with the judge until he retires, and it'll be transferred to a new trial judge. So at this point, I think we're in the process of amending our settlement agreement to most likely remove the police site. But, you know, so there's no deadlines at the moment, but, you know, it's not something we can take a year plus to do. You know, so we probably have to figure this out in the next couple of months, you know, which seems like a very quick time frame. But, you know, it's right now the court's working with us. We still have our immunity as we're kind of working through this. So we don't know what our next deadline is to meet the court's obligations and requirements, but you know, that's something that we're working on. In terms of your second question, I'm sorry, can you repeat your second question, Judy?
Yes, a number of units have been built in the town in the last 3 years, and I don't think any of them, or have they been built or have they been approved for being built? Perhaps.
Okay, yes, thank you. So yes, there have been a number of kind of townhouse units that have been constructed. This is really infill development where it's been, you know, 2 or 3 units here or there. I know the one project in particular, the YMAC unit that was approved, that was the 8 semi-detached units. That project is what spurred council wanting to amend that mandatory set aside ordinance. So, you know, based on the initial mandatory set aside ordinance, it only applied for those projects where a use variance, density variance, rezoning or rehabilitation or redevelopment plan was required. Because that developer used the underlying zoning, he wasn't required to do a mandatory set aside ordinance. Instead, he has to pay that residential development fee, a fee for each of those 8 units. So otherwise, the other developments, if they're 5 units or less, either way, that set aside ordinance wouldn't kick in. So they all just have to pay that development fee as well. But it really was that project at the YMAC site that spurred council wanting to amend that mandatory set aside ordinance. So we won't be in that situation again. Mayor, I think you're muted.
Yep,
Yeah.
sorry, I got it. Sharon and Abraham, it's your turn.
Yes, hi, Abraham and Sharon. We live on Coriel Street. We also were victims of the flood, which really prompts a question. You know, first of all, I appreciate all this information, this background, technicalities. It's new information for me. But you mentioned sites that have a history of flooding. What is the plan to allow development so that it is a site that will again be vulnerable? I mean, I don't understand that. So maybe you can answer that question.
Yeah, so I think maybe the sites you're talking about might be the Corboy site and the Trenton Cracker Factory site where there's the overlays for.
Yes.
Yeah, so you know, when you do the vacant land analysis, you know, we have the FEMA mapped flood hazard area line on the site. we subtract that out of what the total acreage is of the site and then look at, you know, the upland portion and if that can result in affordable housing units. So, you know, any development that, and that's how we base the zoning off of, but any development would have to comply with the DEP flood hazard area regulations. So, depending on what they would build, they would have to have that finished first floor 2 feet above the flood hazard area elevation. Nothing habitable can be below it, things like that. So, you know, the zoning is really in place to provide that opportunity for potential affordable housing, but the actual development construction has to comply with the DEP regulations.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Sharon, go ahead.
Yes, hi, it's Sharon Helen, and thank you, Emily. You had an awful lot of material to cover there, and you really got through a lot of it for us. Thank you. You mentioned that what Lambertville needs to try to address the most is family rental type, and that Habitat for Humanity in this area doesn't deal with rentals, just with purchases. Are there other organizations or other branches of Habitat elsewhere in New Jersey that do provide that family rental type that we could maybe look to get ideas of how we could provide that in Lambertville?
Yeah, absolutely. There's other organizations. You know, I've worked with Homefront a lot in Mercer County. I don't know if they have really extended into Hunterdon yet, but you know, I think since we're so close, it's worth, we could have a discussion with them. You know, so, but there are other organizations that do focus predominantly more on rental housing. A lot of them are also that they provide the supportive special needs homes, or which are homes for the developmentally disabled or physically disabled. So those are kind of, while they're rental units, you know, and we can count them as rental units, we can't count them as the family rental units. So, you know, but there's still some opportunity where we might be able to have maybe one additional supportive special needs home in town. So, you know, part of this is, which we'll talk more about on the 3rd, are all those different compliance mechanisms, what we've already utilized, how we've met kind of those equations of what, you know, if we've hit those maximums or minimums already, and where our holes are and what we need to provide.
Okay, so if it's possible sometime between now and that March 3rd date, if you could help us see what some of those resources are to help, you know, if the idea of March 3rd is for people in the community to speak in breakout rooms and come up with ideas of how to help provide this, I think if you can help point us to those resources, that might be helpful. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Sharon. Lisa Getz.
Hey, thanks. That was really nice, Emily. Thank you very much for that really thorough presentation. So I just wanted to get clarification. Is the reason that there's the emphasis on renting primarily due to few funding mechanisms or mortgage lenders that help facilitate mortgages for lower income people?
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the Council on Affordable Housing rules basically say, you know, at least 25% of your obligation has to be satisfied through rental units.
Okay.
So of those 25%, 50% of that 25% have to be family rentals. So the city, it's not that the city doesn't have rental units, you know, Heritage Villages rentals, Little Haven Group Home is rentals. We just don't have those family rentals. So when I say family units, those are non-age restricted and those are non-supportive special needs homes. Everything else is considered rental unit or family units.
So I just want to restate. I think maybe I didn't get clear about what I was asking. So
Okay.
I'm not asking so much about the emphasis. I'm more wondering if there was a solution for mortgage acquisition for lower income people, would it make, sales of low income housing or affordable housing rather, something more doable, manageable, appealing? Because there are mechanisms we could explore.
Yeah, and I don't want to say it's impossible. I mean, there's tons of for sale development happening, and most municipalities have for sale inclusionary zoning development happening. It's almost the hardest is for those very low income households to be able to obtain a mortgage, and in those inclusionary developments, we're often finding that the developers will propose the for sale units and then provide, basically fund a supportive special needs home instead to provide those very low income units. So it's very difficult for a very low income household to actually obtain a mortgage. A little less difficult for low income and easier, easiest for moderate income. But there's just some, and I can get some more information on this because I'm not really like 100% fluent on the mortgage process for this, but there's just some criteria or requirements that I think just make it difficult to actually obtain those mortgages.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I would be interested in helping to think about that a little bit too, just because maybe there's just to explore, because home ownership being the sort of the pathway to wealth building, and I mean, a great mix would be so cool. So I would hate to think that if we could find a solution for that, that maybe there could be an introduction of some of that kind of housing as well.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks a lot.
Are there questions from anyone else? I don't see any other hands at the moment. Okay, let's go back to Carol. I see you, Carol. All right.
Thank you. Carol Hookie again. I just had two questions. The first is, I was just wondering how much money the city received in return. I know this is water under the dam for its assuming the obligations for other municipalities, their obligations. And then my second question has to do, and this might be better for the next hearing, on the village apartment side. I know it was recently purchased, so I understand, but is that a possible site for consideration for affordable housing?
Yeah, so in terms of the RCAs and how much money the city received, I'll have to get back to you on that one. I don't have those figures right in front of me. It was definitely in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, but I don't know off the top of my head. So I'll have to get back to you on that one.
Emily, I'm sorry, it's Julia jumping in just for 1 second. The
Yep.
RCAs ended more than a decade ago, closer to 15 years ago. So we certainly can come up with a number, but just putting it in context, that was a very long time ago.
And then in terms of the village apartments, we actually have a public hearing scheduled at the March 2nd planning board meeting to present the area in need of redevelopment designation. The city did ask me to prepare a condemnation redevelopment investigation. So I know the mayor and I have also been meeting with the contract purchaser I don't know if the sale's actually gone through or if it's a contract purchaser yet, but we've been meeting with them also to discuss the site. But we're kind of working on parallel paths right now to see if we can work with them. I think either way, we may want to adopt that redevelopment plan, do the designation, maybe either way, I think adopt the redevelopment plan, hopefully, so we can definitely get affordable units out of that site.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, PAS iPad Pro, I'm going to unmute you if you could just state your name, please.
Paul Stevens, 39 Quarry. Emily, help me out here. The units, potential units up on the old high school site, we don't seem to be giving much attention to how we get those developed, and there's just so much more potential up there. I'm curious why all the focus is on the unmet need?
That's a good question. So for that site, the city's adopted the redevelopment plan that outlines new zoning for the site. It's, but the city doesn't control the site. So there's really, beyond adopting the redevelopment plan, it's really up to the landowner to develop the site based on that new plan. His prior zoning, based on a 2001 settlement agreement, gave him a density of 2.26 units per acre or 46 single-family detached homes. The redevelopment plan gives him a density closer to that 6 units per acre with 139 units. The current redevelopment plan has a mix of 67 townhouses, 72 apartments. So it's a much more, a lot more units, but at this point, it's just, the city's done everything it can at this point without wanting to proceed with the condemnation to make that development happen faster.
And so therefore we need to be moving on the unmet need part more proactively. Is that what I'm getting from that, or what? I'm still.
No, so the difference is the reason that we had to move forward more with the police site, which I think is what you're really asking about, is when the high school site was going to be a condemnation redevelopment area, the court set some specific timeframes that the city had to meet to get that project moving forward so those units would be developed. When the city removed that condemnation aspect of it, they no longer would have site control. So we can't then force a property owner to develop their site. Instead, one of the substitutes for the Clausen site was the police site, which the city has control over. So when we made that change from the condemnation to non-condemnation of the high school site, and then added the police site, which the city controls, the court shifted kind of that requirement and time frame to actually have the police site developed, since the city controlled it. Even though it is identified as going towards our unmet need, it's really more about the site control versus the RDP or unmet need in this instance.
Okay, and so was that feedback that was given to us when we decided to do non-condemnation, that we needed to put something in that we had control of then, or?
No, that wasn't, as I indicated earlier, the city was trying to replace the Clausen site with a number of different overlay zones first. It had a lot of different discussions with a lot of different property owners, and it was at that point where we either had to proceed with the condemnation or to keep moving forward with that settlement agreement while still trying to find ways to replace the Clausen site or amend the settlement agreement.
Was there any thought at that time to putting in what was done in December? Just putting the overlay across everything that's between 29 and the river?
Not at that time, it wasn't. The standard mandatory set aside, I should say, that most municipalities are adopting only applies to in that use variance, density variance, redevelopment plan rezoning situation. It's very rare that the mandatory set aside ordinance will apply to just the underlying zoning that already meets kind of the presumptive minimum requirements. So it wasn't even a thought at that time to expand the mandatory set aside ordinance.
Okay, thanks, Emily, and thanks for going through all this tonight. It helps a lot.
No problem.
Other questions? Anyone else? Yes, Alice, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, I'm Alice Bebout, living at 49 Douglas Street. And just I'd like a little more information about, the decision not to do condemnation of the high school site. I mean, I think I've heard that because it would cost too much. Is that the reason why the city decided not to proceed with that?
That is my understanding, was that, it, it was just gonna cost too much, and at the time, when the city was doing its financial review, you have to put so much money up that, and then you potentially have to bond for the rest of it, where the city just didn't even have the capital to put up the initial amount. So I think that was really the precipice for wanting to switch it to the non-condemnation plan.
Okay, and also the Oyster Factory site, I mean, is that potentially a viable?
Are you talking about the Trenton Cracker Factory site?
Sorry, Trenton Cracker Factory.
Yeah, the city adopted an overlay ordinance for that site in 2019. So that permits the adaptive reuse of that building to convert the existing building into apartments at a density of, I believe it was 10 units per acre, with a set aside of either the 15% set aside if the units were rental, or a 20% set aside if the units were for sale.
So what could that provide in terms of affordable housing?
Well, now that there's an application for the former River Horse site to become a
Right.
cannabis retailer, we're only really looking at the former gym site. We
Right.
don't have the square footages
Okay.
in front of me for that site. So I would have to get back to you in terms of
Okay.
the number.
But does it seem to be, I mean, are there problems with proceeding with that, or is it that just an unknown at this point?
Yeah, it's just an unknown. I mean, in order to meet unmet need, the city really just has to adopt either overlay zones or just straight out inclusionary zoning to provide that realistic opportunity. So, the city's met its obligation just by adopting the overlay zone to meet the unmet need. And then it's a matter of if the property owner ever wants to actually utilize that or not.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for all this information. I appreciate that this is being done for us.
No problem.
Any other questions? We're winding down here on time. Okay, looks like we are finished with questions. Again, I just want to thank Emily for an incredible amount of work. Really, she's an amazing planner and an amazing resident to have here in the city. So it's much gratitude to you, Emily, for tonight and for all of the work you do. I feel like I spend more time with Emily than I do with my own husband these days. So good for you. I guess there's one more question. Hang on, I'm going to ask Laura Lindsay to unmute herself and ask a question. Laura, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Laura Lindsay, 52 Lincoln. Thank you. This was an excellent educational overview on this important topic. Emily, can you just, there was so much information you presented. How many actual units are we obligated to have ready, and within what time frame?
Yeah, so with that 88 unit RDP that we have, that's that realistic development potential, 22 of those can be bonus credits through the rental units. So then we have to actually provide 66 units. Technically, the third round is over 2025. So doesn't really leave us much time. We're certainly not the only municipality in this situation where, they've had settlement agreements, they've provided the zoning and the mechanisms, but the units just haven't been built yet. So, it's, and while 2025 is coming up very quick, we're not really sure for the fourth round, since it's still in the court system, nobody's talking about or creating the methodology to identify what the fourth round obligations are going to be. So, essentially we're supposed to provide 66 units. We have all but 28 actually created of those 66 to meet that RDP. So, we'll see what we can do for this amended settlement. You know, maybe if it seems like some of the, you know, yeah, we'll see if maybe we can shift some of the high school site to unmet need. You know, we might be able to shift things around as part of an amended settlement.
Emily, is it not also true that we may end up when we renegotiate creating a greater need at this point? I mean, when we get back in with fair share, that there might actually be, I don't want to call it a penalty, but an increased requirement.
Yeah, you know, it's more often, most likely, it's not going to just be a 5-for-5 swap at this point for the police site. So, you know, the police site was just going to create 5 affordable units. Most likely in this next amended plan, we'll have to create realistic opportunity for more than 5 units. We're not sure what that number is going to be yet. But, you know, we're starting to look at some potential, as well as looking forward to hearing what the public's thoughts are on March 3rd.
Thanks. Lisa, let's make this quick. I have 1 or 2 things to wind down, and then we'll finish on time.
Sure. Is there a mechanism for, let's say, an owner or a landlord in town to take the initiative to create one of their units or properties and make it affordable?
Absolutely. It's called the Market to Affordable program. I'll definitely be going into detail on this on the 3rd, but it's essentially a landlord or an owner can take what's currently a market rate unit and deed restrict it for affordable unit. So takes it from a market rate level to an affordable level.
Cool. Super. Thanks. Look forward to hearing more about that.
Good. Thanks again. So just to wind down, remind everybody that we have another one of these on March 3rd, in which we'll be discussing various mechanisms to create more affordable housing in the city. As a reminder, this has been recorded and will be posted to the city website. The slide deck will also be posted separately to the city website. I would encourage anybody who has any questions to contact me directly, Mayor Nowick at lambertville.nj.org. You can always stop in at office hours on Wednesdays from 3 to 6. And I guess that's it. Emily, do you have any last words for us?
Thank you for having me tonight. I know it was a lot of information. And, you know, it's affordable housing. While it's an obligation for us all to provide, it is not an easy topic to digest. There's a lot of, you know, rules and regulations pertaining to it that are not easily understandable. So thank you for bearing with me tonight. And I look forward to hopefully seeing you all at the March 3rd event.
Thanks. Council President Taylor, did you have something to say?
Yes, thank you. Emily, thanks as always for your hard work on this. Thank you everybody for attending. And just a note for our next session, what Emily's going to do at our next session is give an overview of the mechanisms that are available to us to use for affordable housing. And then, you know, just reiterating what she stated earlier at the beginning of the session tonight, that we'll then be asking people to get together and come up with what their ideas are. So we want to make sure that there's a public forum for discussing what's possible, while also we'll have to, unfortunately, the bad part of our jobs is being very realistic about what's possible in the short term to meet our requirements right now, and how we can be more creative and more innovative in the long term. So just want to make sure that everybody's prepared for what's coming in the next session. And I think, Emily, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you will be posting your presentation early so people can start to look at what those mechanisms are.
Yes, yeah. So you'll have a description of what the mechanisms are well in advance of March 3rd, so you can start thinking about it already.
Okay. Thank you once again, everyone. I appreciate everybody's time this evening, and we'll see you all on the 3rd, if not before. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you very much.